Hello, everybody, and welcome back into another episode of the Hockey Writers Roundtable season preview edition. And we are moving right along here with the Boston Bruins. And Scott Roche, thanks for coming on again. You've seen him obviously on any of the playoff preview shows. He's always on those. And I believe you were on the season preview show last year as well. So welcome to the show, and how's it going?
Thank you, Matthew. Things are going well, and I can't believe we're ready for another season.
Yeah, we're getting there. We're pretty close to training camp starting, and whenever you watch this, and maybe tomorrow, who knows? Training camp could be starting already. But we're going to preview the Boston Bruins, and as everyone knows, they had a ridiculously good season last year. I had a record season. That's probably not going to be broken for a long time, but didn't do very much in the playoffs. They were expected to win the Stanley Cup. That didn't happen. And then lost two of their best players in the offseason to retirement. So we'll talk about that, but we'll start there. Let's start with the offense and the two major pillars that have been. I mean, Krejci had one season where he wasn't there, but for the most part, these two guys, Patrice Bergeron and David Krejci, were massive parts of this team. They were Stanley Cup winners. They were, they're in the all-time franchise points list, and like any of them, it's ridiculous. So they won't have them this season. Scott, let's start there before we get to the new additions. This is the biggest storyline, I think, going into the season. How are they going to replace these guys? And I mean, will this sink their season going in?
Well, I'll be first to admit that I thought Bergeron was going to come back. I thought with the centennial season that he was going to come back, and the season he had last year, won the Selke, won it rather easily. Still one of the top centers in the game. I thought he'd give it one more go, but he decided not to. Krejci, I'm not surprised. As far as replacing them, you look at the roster right now, there's nobody on that roster that's going to replace what they did for you, maybe even what one of them did for you. You go into training camp with Pavel Zacha and Charlie Coyle as your top two centers. And granted, they played well in the playoffs last year when both Bergeron and Krejci sat out a couple games against Florida, but that was just a small sample size. Now you got an 82-game sample size. If Don Sweeney doesn't make any moves via a trade or anything, I think it's going to be a little rough sledding early on for them, and it's going to be interesting to see what Jim Montgomery does with the lineup, because Charlie Coyle a couple of years ago in Bruce Cassidy's last year, Charlie Coyle got the number 2 spot behind Bergeron when, like you said, Krejci left for a year and didn't go well for the first 2+ months. And Cassidy moved Eric Haller up there, who ended up being an MVP type of player for the Bruins themselves because of what he did. And Charlie Coyle kind of thrived on the third line, and he did again last year, which I think is his natural center spot, is the number 3 line center. Now you're asking him to move up to a first or second spot for a whole season. I'm not quite sure he's going to be able to handle that load.
Yeah, that's going to be the biggest thing in training camp, to see who kind of will be in between the two big guys, David Pastrnak, Brad Marchand, if they do play together on the top line. I mean, right now, according to Cap Friendly's depth chart, they are between Charlie Coyle. So I don't know. I mean, Coyle and Zacha, they're okay players. They're not top line guys. Before we move to the new guys, I want to ask you, who do you feel they could get? I mean, in the trade market right now that could potentially do it, because there are some guys that have been talked about. Mark Scheifele, I mean, seems like he's not going to be moved now, but there is some talk about certain guys kind of moving. Dubois being the guy that was already moved. I think Boston was talking about that. I don't know if I've heard, but what do you think?
I wrote about Scheifele about a month ago, thinking that would probably be the best move once Bergeron retired, and he could be the guy that could slide into that top 6 role and maybe not replace Bergeron, but become the closest to having success up there. You look at the issues going on in Calgary with Elias Lindholm. Maybe there's a move there. The problem is everyone keeps talking about the cap space the Bruins are going to have next year. They're going to have close to 30, maybe 33, I think it is, $1 million in cap space, with a lot of contracts coming off the books. And everyone talks about these guys being free agents next year in the free agent class. The problem with waiting till then is if they get moved by the trade deadline to another club, it's probably gonna include a extension of some kind, and they're not going to be available. So if I'm Don Sweeney, I think you need to figure out once camp starts what you got, and then see what's out there. And I know there's pieces he doesn't want to part ways with, but there are enough pieces, I think, in his that he can part ways with, and moving a prospect or two, maybe one of your top ones, maybe a Fabian Lysell. If you don't think he's gonna be able to be in the NHL full-time anytime soon, maybe that's the route you go. But I definitely think that the only way they're going to be able to address this is through a trade, and it has to be done, like I said, before the trade deadline, because you don't want to put all the eggs in the basket. But those guys are going to be available next July, because more than likely, if they're moved, they're not going to be.
Mm-hmm. True, and that's a risk. I mean, then all of a sudden you're going into next season with nothing again, and who knows how this season's going to go too, right?
Mm-hmm.
But let's move to new guys, and they added a lot of veterans. I mean, there was no young guys added. Maybe Morgan Geekie is your youngest, 25 years old. They added James Van Riemsdyk, Milan Lucic, redemption tour maybe. We'll see what he does. Yeah, so out of those guys, who do you think is going to have the better season? Is any of these guys going to be able to move the needle at all? Or is it just going to be, I mean, none of these guys are big guys anymore. I mean, they were in their prime, they were, but not so much right now.
To me, this free agency by Don Sweeney felt like putting a Band-Aid on a pretty big open wound, and he's just patching it with veterans and guys on the back end of their career, almost like a transition year is coming up. I think one person to really keep an eye on is Morgan Geekie.
Mm-hmm.
If you believe the reports out there, Elliot Friedman reported shortly after he signed with the Bruins that he had other offers out there. But one thing that kind of swayed him towards Boston was the front office telling him he's going to have a bigger expanded role with the Bruins this year. Now, what that is, I don't know. Could he slide in the top six as a wing if he's playing well? Maybe. Could he move up as a center? Maybe. Don't see it, but maybe. I think he's someone, and I just, again, recently wrote about this, that is primed for a big season, kind of like the Pavel Zacha, struggled in New Jersey, came to Boston, and yes, it was in the top six with David Krejci, with David Pastrnak. Anyone can really have a breakout year with those guys around them. But I think that he's someone who could fit that same type of thing. And the Bruins are going to have any type of success this year. I think they're going to need a season from Geekie, not to what Zacha had, but something close. And I think another guy to keep an eye on is they made a move in the middle of July, getting Jesper Boqvist from New Jersey, signing him. Again, not a big name, but a young player who struggled a little bit in New Jersey. Maybe they're hoping he can find a new home, a new system, a new group. Maybe things can turn around for him and he can be a bit of a missing piece they need.
Yeah, like I said, there are some young guys that could potentially make a difference. Mm-hmm. Like Morgan Geekie's one, I think too. I mean, 25 years old, he's entering that athletic prime. I mean, he could potentially break out as a guy that, I mean, obviously not in the realm of who they need, in the top six, but could potentially be a surprise. And Boqvist too. I mean, I do agree with that too. I think he could be a guy that could surprise as well. But these aren't guys that they're going to make the huge, that big hole, like you said, is being put on with a Band-Aid right now. And I don't know. I mean, like I say, Lucic and Van Riemsdyk are okay players right now. I mean, they're going to provide something, but they're not going to be that 25, 30 goal scorers that they were in their prime. So yeah, it's going to be interesting. Patrick Brown's another addition, but again, fourth line. Physicality maybe, but again, not going to move the needle offensively, what they need in this offense, because that's some huge shoes to fill, that's for sure.
The Lucic signing, and I put this out on formerly Twitter, now X, when it was rumored right before free agency started. I said, oh no, and I got kind of a little bit of a backlash from some people. But to me, this is just a centennial season, one last season go around type of thing, and a physical presence that they're missing and they didn't have last year to protect the better players. But Lucic was a great Bruin in his prime. He was a big part of that Stanley Cup in 2011. To me, that was a very, very curious signing, and it kind of had me thinking, like, what is going to be the direction this year that Sweeney and the front office go?
Yeah, it seems like you said, but it seems like a transition type year. I mean, transition to what though? Like that's like there's no real young guys coming up. Like Fabian Lysell is probably your best prospect that could potentially make a difference. And I mean, there are some interesting guys. You got who they just Farinacci they just signed to an ELC. Um, could I mean I don't know how if he's going to make any difference in the NHL at this point. I mean, he's probably going to be with Providence most of the year, but I don't know. I think there's obviously some prospects that could potentially make a difference in the future, but I don't know about now. And that's what they need at this point on offense, in particular on offense.
Mm-hmm.
All right, moving on to defense, which is probably still their strength. They did lose Dmitry Orlov, who was only from the trade deadline on. So really, he didn't. I mean, obviously, they probably wanted to keep him, but at that price tag that they got, that Carolina signed him at, my gosh, that was a lot of money, which they couldn't afford. But what do you think about the defense going into this year? Obviously, they're going to be healthy. They don't have those injuries that were bothering them at the beginning of the last season that didn't seem to make a difference. But what do you think about the defense going into this season?
I think one interesting addition was Kevin Shattenkirk, basically taking Connor Clifton's spot, a veteran. Played okay with Anaheim. I mean, you're really not playing for much after the holidays in Anaheim, but he played well. I think that could be an interesting one-year addition. I mean, obviously, you got Charlie McAvoy, Hampus Lindholm, Brandon Carlo, Matt Grzelcyk, and Derek Forbort. So you have 5 guys back. You lose Clifton, replace him with Shattenkirk. You have Jakub Zaboral, who we're going on year 8 and since the draft in 2015. And he's been someone, if he's not going to help you now, is he ever going to help you? Why are you hanging on to him? Like he could be part of a trade package because when he does play, he's a steady defenseman back there and he could be a number 3 somewhere. But I think their calling card this year is going to be winning games 2-1, 3-2 with their defense, hoping their goaltending plays well again, and hoping to get a few bounces down the other end and end up on the back of the net. But it's clear that they're banking on their defense and their goaltending this year is the 2 prime spots, and they're going to go with that, it seems like, at the beginning of the year and see what happens.
Yeah, it's a good one to move to is the goaltending because they do have both their big pillars coming back. Linus Ullmark, who won the Vezina, Jeremy Swayman, who's really up and coming goaltender that they were able to re-sign, obviously for only 1 year, but 24 years old. He's still the future, I think, unless they do trade him. But what do you think of the tandem? Are they going to be as good as this? I mean, they still have their defense in front of them, so I mean, most likely they will be. But what do you think?
Well, I don't think Linus Ullmark will have the same type of year he had, but if he can have his track record in Buffalo wasn't very good. I mean, have a good year and then he'd be hurt and struggle the next year. And they can't afford that right now. Is Swayman ready to handle 50, 55 games if needed? Maybe, but I don't think you want to put that load on him just yet. They have a great connection. They both played well. Like you said, they have the defense in front of them. They have the system that is going to benefit them. They're going to have to play well again. And Swayman has shown it that he can. And Ullmark, they're going to need him big time this year. You have almost $8.5 million of your cap locked up between the pipes. That's a lot of money locked up between the pipes. So keeping both of them, to me, tells me that they're going to bank on their defense and goaltending this year, and they're going to need those 2 to play really well again and avoid any long-term injuries.
Yeah, and margin for error, I think, is even less this season because of the offense isn't going to be there as much. I mean, their numbers are really good. I mean, but if they don't have the offense to support it, they're like you said, they're going to have to win games 2-1. And those margin for error is really low, really, really short there. So I mean, it's tough when you're having to win games in that fashion. So, but I mean, goaltending defense have won championships in the past. So I don't know about this era of the NHL. This is a lot more offense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Now we've talked about all 3 position groups there. How do they stack up in this division now? I mean, obviously they won it and they won the NHL last year, but did they take a big step back? Most of these teams in the Atlantic have moved. I mean, you've got teams getting better. You got Buffalo, you got Ottawa, you got Detroit went crazy and acquired a bunch of guys. They're going to be a better team. So do they still win the division, or are you seeing them kind of closer to that maybe borderline that they may not even make the playoffs?
In my opinion, you're right. The Buffaloes, the Detroits, the Ottawas, they're coming. They're a lot closer this year. They're going to be a lot closer this year than they were last year. And I really see Detroit as a playoff team this year if everything goes well. The Atlantic still, I think, goes through Toronto. If they don't win the Atlantic this year, there should be an investigation because on paper, and Tyler Bertuzzi and everything else, they are loaded.
Yeah.
And their time is right now. So I think that everybody else in the Atlantic is going to be chasing them. Tampa Bay still has Vasilevsky in net. Florida's coming off a run to the Stanley Cup Finals. I think they're going to be missing some of their key pieces to begin the year at least. But like you said, from Tampa, Florida, Boston, Detroit, and Ottawa, Buffalo, there's not a lot of room forever.
Yeah.
When you go on a little bit of a losing streak and the other team goes on collecting what they call the loser points and stuff, and they build up points, you could find yourself in a little bit of a hole early on. It's going to be tough to get out of this year because I think those other teams are going to get more points, and they have certainly gotten better, and they're certainly making strides of catching up with the Bruins, the Leafs, and the Lightning.
Yeah, that's this division is going to be one of the tougher ones, I think, in the future, and maybe even be this season, because there's no going to be any easy points. I mean, even the Montreal Canadiens, they're probably going to finish towards the bottom again, but that's some good young talent that could steal games away from these teams, and that could be the difference right now in the playoff race. So, yeah, this was going to be interesting. But I didn't anticipate Boston to do really good last year with all those injuries, and they didn't. So I'm not even going to predict this one. I'm just going to be wrong anyway.
Well, I'm going to predict it because you asked me to. I think you look over in the Metropolitan, Pittsburgh got better, adding Carlson. Carolina is just very good. They added Orlov, and I think they're a tough team to begin with. I think the Bruins' path to the playoff is a wild card spot at best, and I think that they're going to find it tough sledding to keep the battle with the other clubs. I think the Metropolitan got a little better too because you still have the Devils and Rangers, the Hurricanes. I mean, the Penguins might be a wild card team. Yeah, and then you're looking to fight with them in Detroit and Florida, whoever. I think it's really going to be difficult for me to see them unless there's a big move to bring in a player or two, especially a top six center. It's almost like they have no margin forever. They're going to have to stay as healthy as possible through a whole year if they're going to be in the wild card discussion, in my opinion. And I've said this before, and people think I'm crazy, but they traded their number one pick next year to Detroit for Bertuzzi, but it's top 10 protected. So that's something to remember too down the line, because if they don't make the playoffs and they fall enough further back and they end up in the top 10, they keep their pick for next year, and then it rolls over to 2025.
That's a good point. That's going to be interesting to watch too. They're not a lock. They're not a lock in that top tier anymore. And that I knew that was going to happen once Bergeron and Krejci retired, and it's happened. And we'll see what the next step is for the Bruins for sure, because those two have been, like I say, staples in that lineup for a long time. Okay, quick fire round. We're going to go through a bunch of quick questions here, some fun ones. Start with pick one or two breakout stars going to this season.
I'm gonna bank on Geekie, who we talked about earlier. And I think a guy who really not so much breakout, who needs to have a really good year because it's a contract year, is I think Matt Grzelcyk on defense. There's a lot of rumors about moving him and potential trades and everything. I mean, he's been with the Bruins a long time, but it's going to be interesting next summer what they do if they still have him, what they sign him to. So I think they got some pretty good young defensemen coming up, like Mason Lohrei, and they got the Mitchell kid from Chicago in the trade. So I think this is a big year for Grzelcyk to show that he can stay healthy and still be the player he is, because he fell out of the playoff rotation last year, which was a big loss in the lineup.
Yeah, he doesn't have to be deal with Orlov now, so he'll have a good have a spot in the lineup. Okay, who needs to bounce back from last season that didn't have a good one?
Well, that's tough because everyone had a great year last year.
That's the problem, right? So everyone had a bad season, right?
But I'm gonna go a little different direction. I'm gonna say Charlie Coyle needs to prove that he's gonna be able to handle the top six role, because that's gonna be key. Because if he can't do that, there's no one in the system. There's no one coming. There's no really replacement for him, even never mind Krejci and Bergeron. Charlie Coyle is gonna have to play like a top six center and prove that he's able to handle that, because when he's been in there before, he hasn't been able to handle it for a long amount of time.
Yeah, I mean, he really hasn't. I mean, he had that potential to be a top line center, but he's 31 years old now, so he's really set into what he is. I think he is a top six guy, but is he consistent top six guy is the question.
Perfect third line guy, in my opinion.
Definitely, yeah, and that's where he's supposed to be, but that's not where he's going to be going into this for sure, unless Geekie takes his spot. All right, an X factor. I mean, we could probably say Geekie again. What's an X factor going into this season? Could be a player, could be something else too.
To me, it's going to be, this may sound weird, but Jim Montgomery. I mean, everything went right for you last year. Every button you pushed in the regular season worked. Every decision you made worked. Granted, he had Patrice Bergeron and Brad Marchand in the locker room, who probably did most of his work for him in the locker room. Yeah. But Jim Montgomery's a good coach. Now you don't have Bergeron, you don't have Krejci. How are you going to handle this? You're going to have more young guys. You're going to have guys who haven't played in the system. It's going to be a learning curve for some people. There's going to be a lot more challenges this year than he faced last year, aside from the playoffs. How is he going to handle that, and how is he going to react to that, and how his play is going to react to that as well?
That's a good one. He did. He pushed every button and it all worked. So it's gonna be interesting to see how he does that, especially after the disappointing of the playoffs too. How it didn't work out. Okay, one prospect or a rookie that could surprise and make the roster or training camp, because there is some spots for these guys to potentially make it.
There are, and we obviously mentioned Lysell earlier. Johnny Beecher at center is another one, but one prospect that I'm interested in seeing how his camp goes is Georgi Murakulov. He had a great freshman year at Ohio State, came in last year, played really well. He's a little older than a prospect. I think he's in his 22, 23, 20, somewhere up there, but I've seen him play a few times. He's got a very good skill set. He sees the ice very well, a big body, physical. He could be someone that could make the roster out of camp in the bottom six and maybe provide some offense from there. Fabian Lysell is another one. It's got to be soon, because you're going to need that type of production. You're going to need him to grow up. You're going to need him to be able to take middle six role somewhere at some point, whether it's this year or next year. He's going to have to do that. But Murakulov to me is going to be the interesting one in camp, and see if he makes the team and how he does in the preseason, because he has the skill to do it. Can he transition that from the AHL to the NHL? Yeah,
that's the question. So we'll see. Okay, going off of that, I added this question in before I sent it to you before, but pick one prospect to watch that is not going to make the NHL, but is just in the system that everyone should be watching this season.
It's got to be Mason Laurie, because I think maybe in any other year, he might have a realistic shot to make this roster, but you have Forbort and Riemsdyk expiring contracts at the end of this year. From what I've seen, he's as good as advertised. Big body, a big puck-moving defenseman, jumps up in the play. He's got a good skill set, can shoot the puck. He's a great passer. I think he is. If he's not up there at some point this year, he's definitely going to be up there next year. I think he's one of their. I got him as my number one Bruins prospect over Lysell right now.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure when there was the rumors about JT Miller or Bo Horvat going to the Bruins, I had him in my proposal to get him from here. So I agree. I really like him. Okay, that's a good guy to watch. Okay, now that there's no Bergeron and Krejci, obviously it's probably Pastrnak, but who will lead the team in scoring on offense or forwards?
Probably Pastrnak. I want to keep an eye on is Jake DeBrusk's had a great last year and a half, and he's on a contract year. Bruins haven't committed to him beyond this year. It's going to be interesting. He's got 27 career goals, including last year. He's going to be someone who they're going to need a lot of offense from. But I can if it's not Pasternak, I think they're going to be in trouble. I really do.
Also interesting, he's not going to have that really good center to play with. I mean, nothing against Coyle or Zacha, but who did Pasternak play most of last season with? It was
Krejci and Zacha. And when Krejci was out, Zacha was in the middle. So if I'm Montgomery, look at the season those two had. Granted, Krejci's not there. You keep them together because they obviously have some type of connection.
Yeah.
I would go with a Marchand, Zacha, Pasternak first line and move DeBrusk down to the second line. That's what I would do, but I'm not paid to make those decisions. But you saw the connection and success that Zacha and Pasternak had last year. I would keep them together at least to start, and I'd put Marchand on the left wing.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting to watch the training camp as well to see how that all plays out because they're going to have to either load up one line with all the offense or try to spread it out and see how it works. But that's going to be interesting. Who's going to lead the defense in scoring?
It's Charlie McAvoy. I mean, he's their all everything back there. He was out part of the year last year and he came back. And if it wasn't for the season Hampus Lindholm had, he probably would have led the team in scoring. And Hampus Lindholm had a ridiculous season last year and really picked up the slack when McAvoy was out. But I now that he's fully healthy and he knows he's got to take a little bit more of a load on his shoulder, I think he's going to definitely lead them in scoring. He does everything for them, especially transition the puck and coming out of the defensive end and jumping in the offense.
For sure. Do you see Lindholm taking a step back this season? Because, like you said, he did a really good, but he was put into a big role to start the season. It won't be in that same thing this year.
He was put into a big role, and I'm going to be honest with you, I didn't see that happening, him handling that role without McAvoy. I think McAvoy back and healthy could maybe take a little bit of less load off his shoulders and make it a lot easier for him. But I still think he's a legit top defenseman, and I would keep him and McAvoy together.
Yeah, so I mean, their top four is really good. So he's going to be able to play with a good one.
You can mix and match anyway and be fine.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about trades. Who's one player that could be traded before the deadline?
That's a fascinating question because I really think when you have to see where they are at the deadline. Are they pretty much out and he's going to be in sell mode? Are they going to be borderline, make a few additions and go for it? Are they going to be somewhat in a playoff position where they're buying? To me, it starts with Jake DeBrusk. Where are you in the standings? What I'm sure there's going to be negotiations beforehand with him and his agent. What do you think? What are you thinking? This is what we're thinking. He's been rumored in a lot of trades as a trade starter. But to me, it's going to be dependent on where you are in the standings at that time. I think the number one name is Jake DeBrusk because he's such a wild card and he's on a contract year. So I think he'd be the easiest one to move. And I think a lot of teams would jump at the chance to take him.
For sure. And since he retracted that trade request, I don't know when he's going to want it. If he wants to be traded again, who knows? But we'll see with that one. All right. One bold prediction. This one's always fun to do. A bold prediction for this season.
I'm going to go back to Charlie McAvoy. He's going to win the Norris. I'm going to go really big. Okay. I think this is going to be a big year for him. I think he knows it, and I think he's going to respond the way that they're going to need him to. Now, we saw last year Erik Karlsson won it, and they didn't even make the playoffs.
Yeah.
And there's a real possibility that the Bruins don't make the playoffs this year. Will that hurt him? Maybe, unless he has a ridiculously year. But I think he's going to be in the conversation. I could see him he's been close before. He's been knocking on the door. I could see him taking on the leadership role this year and just bursting through the door and having one of those type of seasons.
I like that. Yeah,
it's bold.
It's bold. It is. We'll see, because there's a lot of great defense. Right. Yeah. It's insane. Well, I mean, this is outside the NHL because outside of the Bruins at least. But since Bergeron is retired, who do you see as the front runner for the Selke now? It's an interesting question because Bergeron wins it almost every year. So it's like.
It is, and I saw everybody on social media want to rename it as soon as he announces retirement. It says, okay, now it's time to name it the Patrice Bergeron Award.
Yeah.
I really like Boqvist down in Florida. He won it. He won it a couple of years ago. I really like him as a front runner for the award. I just think he does so many good things for them, and a lot of the stuff goes through him. And he's kind of like a Bergeron with such a calming presence, wins a lot of big draws. He just plays the game the right way. I would go with Sasha Alexander Barkov.
Yeah, I like that. I've liked Barkov and a lot. I mean, I think he could definitely be, and he's probably happy now. It's like, good, I can maybe win some awards now.
Right. Yeah.
All right, final question, because again, Bergeron's retired. Captaincy's up for grabs. Who is going to get the next C? Is it Marchand, or do you have someone else?
I have Marchand. It's amazing to me how many people want to give it to McAvoy or Pasternak at this point, but I think Brad Marchand has held his due there. I know he's not a fan favorite of a lot of people and a lot of teams, especially up north of the border. Yeah. But he has cleaned up his act lately. He has been better by his standards. I just think you see the shows and stuff, the interaction he has. I just think it's that time for him. What he has left in the tank, I don't know now that Bergeron's gone. His contract is up soon. I don't know what's going to play out there, but I could see the C on his shoulder for a couple of years. If not, it's probably going to be McAvoy, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, it'll be interesting to see what they want. Do they want to give it to a young guy right now to kind of transition, I guess, into a new era? Because really, you're moving into a new era. All these veterans are going. You need some young guys to kind of form a new core, and that's going to be an interesting thing to see in the next, who knows? I mean, like I said, there's not really, and it's tough because there's not many prospects they can build around. I mean, who are you building around? It's interesting, but that's how all these, veteran teams that win cups and are successful for so long, how's it going to transition to the next era? And that's going to be interesting to watch in the next few years.
And don't get me wrong, I think Don Sweeney, I wrote about this. Don Sweeney did the right thing last year to trade deadline. Went all in.
Yeah,
he had to go all in. He had to show the team that he was with the moves, getting Orlov and Bertuzzi, and even Garnet Hathaway was like a Boston fan favorite in the fourth line down there. He played well. I think those were the right moves. A lot of people now question it, look back what happened against Florida and say you gave away too much. He had to go for it. He had to make the right move. You had the best team. Now, when the playoffs started, if you had asked me, would you take the Bruins or the field? I probably would have taken the field because I don't think I think things would have caught up with them at some point. I didn't think it would happen against Florida, but I thought eventually things would catch up with them. But I think he did the right thing by going all in, making those moves, and basically selling the farm to win a cup, and it just didn't work out.
I mean, that's the risk you take.
Absolutely.
And sometimes it doesn't work. And obviously it didn't for the Bruins. But thanks, Scott, for coming on the show for a season preview for the Bruins. And we'll see how this team, I don't know how much it will change before we get the season started if they do make a big move. But as of now, it's Pavel Zacha, Charlie Coyle, and trying to lead those top two lines. And we will see how it all plays out in training camp and the regular season. But before we get going, before we leave here, your Twitter, social media, where can everyone kind of follow you?
You can follow me at sroach35. I do a lot of Bruins talk on there, and I post a lot of my articles. And if I do a lot of mailbags, so if you have a question, hit me up. I'll answer it. I'm looking for some good ones. I might even do a preseason one soon, so be on the lookout. All
right. Yeah, keep an eye out for that. Get your questions in. So, but there's another preview show in the books as we count down the days till the regular season starts here at the Hockey Writers. We've got preview articles coming out almost every day on different topics at thehockeywriters.com. Follow Scott on Twitter, like you said, and at the Hockey Writers for any of his articles that come out. I'm pretty sure you get one out almost every day. So make sure you're following that. All the other Bruins writers as well. They've got some great stuff coming out. And we'll keep waiting till the regular season starts and we have to actually, instead of talking about it, we actually have some stuff to talk about rather than previewing. But until next time, we'll see you on another Hockey Writers preview show at the Hockey Writers Roundtable. We'll see you next time.